University of Cape Town, we can see that there's a project of Timbuktu in order to translate these West African manuscripts. But, as they say, they have gone further to translate other manuscripts that were found in Africa at an early period. As we read, new discoveries of collection have been identified in Mozambique and Madagascar in both Arabic and so-called Ajami, Makua in Arabic script, Malagasy in Arabic script. Existing collections in Zanzibar in Arabic and Swahili have been supplemented with New York on private libraries. A recent publication of a collection of legal materials from coastal Somalia has directed attention to materials there. In Ethiopia, there is a long-standing tradition of Coptic Christian writing in Amharic, and research on Amharic books, arts is necessary there. Also texts written in both Arabic and Amharic. In Addis Ababa archives, the list of examples goes on and covers many parts of the continent. Writing systems in Africa are numerous, and I have shown in my previous video that the African writing systems that are vast and wide are underrated by the international population. Even most Africans are not aware of these writing systems, and that Europeans gave big credit to Africans that could write, knowing that there were Africans who couldn't. Now, what they didn't understand was that the reason why there were kingdoms that were literate and kingdoms that were illiterate living in the same location was that Africans respected the natural way of things. They did not want to disturb cultures too much, because those cultures represented their ancestors, in the same way that they didn't want to disturb animals or trees. This is what they did with other populations. In fact, you would even find something as strange as them taking slaves from rival kingdoms and leaving kingdoms or chieftains that are tribal in nature. This is why you hardly find any Khoisan DNA in African Americans, even though we know that African Americans lived throughout the entire Congolese areas where slaves were snatched. But let's go into this kingdom that we haven't heard of, or other people haven't heard of, that has to do with writing. It's called the Kingdom of Anzinku. And this kingdom is not even a lost kingdom, because it continued into the 1700s, and really it's truly still around in a sense. While we can tell that the Arabs inspired the writing systems of Mali and the systems of the Swahili coast, thus creating a literature system which was widely adopted because of the scholastic traditions of these Africans that existed at the time, who believed in schools which were accidentally called cults by foreigners. It makes it easy for us to understand that the Arabs influenced the writing systems of these areas. But when it comes to this kingdom, who influenced them into creating writing systems? Now, what doesn't help is that we hardly know this kingdom at all, so we almost have no real samples of their books. The Nile flows thence 400 miles due north and enters another very large lake, which the natives call a sea. It is larger than the first, for it is 200 miles across and lies under the equinoctial line. Regarding this second lake, very certain information is given by the Anziki near Congo, who trade in those parts, and say there are people who sail on the lake in large ships, and who write and use weights and measures, such as they have not in Congo, and that their houses were built of stone and lime, and their customs resemble those of the Portuguese. Hence it might be supposed the empire of Prester John was not far off. Now, for context, this is before the Portuguese had ever landed in Ethiopia, and so Prester John is a mythological person who they thought was a Christian from Ethiopia. In fact, in this book, they talk about cutting through from the area that is mentioned, Brazzaville, where the Anziku are found, all the way through to Ethiopia. They think about cutting a route going through this way. They don't do it. Instead, the sail is through the Cape of Good Hope and then all the way around to India. But in this world, when they're talking about these kingdoms, this is why I just give the credit to the Anzinku. Somebody near the kingdom of Congo, near this place, who they trade with, has writing and large ships and all of that, and they sail through this river, which we can tell that this river that they sail through doesn't go as high as Kanem Bornu, so it can't be them. And it doesn't go as east as Ethiopia or any of those places, so it's probably not Ethiopia. The only reason the Europeans say that they're close is because they're starting to feel like they're seeing civilization the way that the Portuguese would consider large-scale civilization. Now, of course, the second indicator here is that the Portuguese don't know where this location is, so it tells you that they are not influence. They are not the reason why this civilization is sophisticated. We then also have other kingdoms around the Congolese areas, far away, but around the Congolese areas, who are also named as sophisticated. And remember in the other book where Congo was completely isolated from the history of Europeans, those people were still familiar with writing, just like how these guys here report writing, because they're familiar with it. They don't use it often, but they're familiar with it. Just like the Kingdom of Congo, familiar with it. Again, it wasn't used often, but they were familiar with it. Anyway, this represents Western Kings. And where is it from? Is it from Europe? Is it from Africa? Is it from the Middle East? Nope. This is a screen door painted by the Japanese, and it's on foiled gold. And you can see there that they represent an Ethiopian king and a Middle Eastern king. The reason for this is because of Western influence. Because of this Western influence, we would never say that these paintings of the Japanese should not be considered Japanese, but they did have Western influence. In fact, the Edo period, which most people credit to Japanese as this great period, was influenced by the Europeans in the same way that the Middle Ages of, let's say, South African, and I don't mean the country of South Africa, just the southern African kingdoms of Africa would also be influenced by Europeans at this time, growing their artistic styles and all that at the same time. Now, of course, the styles and everything that the Europeans brought were Johnny come lately type stuff because, of course, the Africans had been influenced by the Arabs, other Africans, and obviously their native styles. Even their writing systems are pretty old. But if we look at this Ethiopian that's being portrayed here, it's why is it that the Westerners are portrayed in this way? Where would they get such displays? And of course, they get it because of the Christian influence. This was the evangelizing, the Christianizing of the Japanese people before they were thrown out and seen for the rotten bastards they were at the time. Now, this is marvelous because it shows you how even Japanese people had some familiarity with black people. And of course, we know that there were black people in Japan. We have multiple accounts of, even though they don't mention by name, of black people being brought to Japan over and over again, even some to indulge the curiosity of the Japanese. Myoma period, early 17th century. This is a masterpiece of the Western style painting, once a treasured possession at Aizu Wakamatsu Castle. It forms a pair with a folding screen currently in the Kobe City Museum collection. From right, the figures are thought to be the Persia king, the king of Abyssinia, and Henry IV of France. There are several theories about the identity of the figure on the far left, including the King of England or Francois de Lorraine, Duke of Guise, or Charles V. The painting references a world map published in Amsterdam, magnified, colored, and finished on the large folding screen in a stunning display of the painter's skills. I have tried my best on my channel to make sure that I portray this image that is not known by most people in the world, that the Africans were part of a wider scheme, a wider world, and were trading with places as far as Japan for the longest time in history. But not only that, that most people around the world, from Japan to the Americas, were curious about the people living in Africa and were curious enough to go check, like I showed with the person who came from the Mongol empires in China and landed in Madagascar and then East Africa. And guess what? He paralleled, or he said the same stuff that the Europeans, the Chinese, the Middle Easterners, and other North Africans said about Africa, talking about their great civilizations on the coast. This is why you cannot dispute or You cannot leave out the history of the world. If you try your best to leave out the history of the world and you don't look at the world, especially in this time when the Portuguese had fused all the world and made it practically impossible for us to never to meet each other, never meet each other again, you are missing out on a wide, wide picture, one that spans everything, one that makes our world so large, it's not even worth ignoring anymore. Why waste your time thinking of Africans in one location? I mean, I'll give you a simple example, right? How many black Africans, first of all, there's millions, but how many black Africans do I have to show you who lived in the Middle East and contributed to that entire civilization to make people realize how important black Africans were in the Middle East? When it comes to the West African empires, we see them being written down by the Portuguese and the North Africans and the Arabs in North Africa who write about this Muslim empire in Mali that is highly educational. And the first person to write about it, but he's not the only, there's a bunch of Arabs who went there, was Ibn Battuta. And Ibn Battuta is one of those people who traveled the world. So for him to be impressed by this kingdom, I mean, let's go back a little so that we can make sure we get it. Ibn Battuta traveled from Africa, North Africa, to China. He was one of the first people to report back of this mysterious lands after China where people had never gone, and he wrote all kinds of interesting things about China, which I would love to put on this channel, because why hide that history? It's very important. People need to find out what exactly did this African man, again I call him African because he's from Africa, say about the rest of the world, and why was he as impressed by the kingdom of Mali and the other kingdoms situated in the Ethiopian regions or the Sudanic regions. And speaking about being worldly, remember that I showed you that poem by that Swahili woman that was talking about how you should behave as a person. This tells us something about what Africans thought about philosophies and stuff like that. Because remember, the Western philosophy, we know what it is. We know some version of Eastern philosophy, let's say Chinese philosophy, and we obviously know about the Middle Eastern philosophy with the Arabs and all the diversity that came with it. But in Africa, for some reason, we never hear about African philosophy and how that goes. For some reason, it starts with the Bantu saying a person is a person because of other people, and they leave it there. But we have writing that tells us more, deeper than this could ever go. For example, we have a writer from Timbuktu whose name is, well, let's let him speak for himself. In this manuscript, it says, I am Yusuf ibn Sayyid al Fulani, the original author of this work. I started writing it on a Saturday and completed it in the following Saturday. Before I complete his reading, I want to talk about the fact that there are manuscripts found within these areas of West Africa that talk about places as far as China. And the fact that we haven't read them should let us know that we are in no position to judge Africa and its capabilities until we truly know, like other places in the world, what they were capable of. Renounce this world, you'll be at ease. Okay. Renounce this world, you'll be at ease. Only a fool it seeks to please. Gather from it only the least, 'cause at the end it turns to beast. For wise men it's a land of weed. For God it weighs a mustard seed. The ignorant are deceived by its beauty until he tastes its veiled cruelty. So old the world is in its hide, but seems to look like a young bride. Its bitterness is sweet, and its sweetness is bitter. It turns a friend to a foe in the hereafter. The joy of this life is followed by misery, and its charm is brewed with agony. Like a trip, brief, it never lasts. Who yearns for it remains in lust. Treacherous, faithless, and vile, it pours nectars blend with bile. Refrain from it with your body and soul. Abstain from its amity on the whole. The lover of this world dwells in misery. On judgment day his state is jittery. A decent lad grows to a wild dog, to be goaded near hell's fog. That is a ruse, schemed and disguised. Who's snagged by it will be despised. Oh, guided one, decry it, you'll be secure. Avoid it and live in harmony for sure. From its pleasures the heart thrive, into the ocean of sins hence dive. Man accumulates wealth, fears poverty, resides in the comfort of his world bounty. To a narrow grave he shall depart, and leave behind his property and croft. In the grave sorrow is his inmate, from his past action and trait. All the money and wealth he did gather, surely to him does no longer matter. This poem slash advice reminds me of Proverbs when it says, Wisdom has built her house, she has set up its 7 pillars, she has prepared her meat and mixed her wine, she has also set out a table, she has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city, let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, come eat my food, and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways, and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through wisdom your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead.